Good afternoon to all our listeners and colleagues listening into the Lunch and Learn webinar this afternoon. I hope you found the music quite smoothing and relaxing, but the topic today is quite in contrast with the music that we were playing just now. The presenters are Hanneli Knutse this afternoon, psychometrist here at JVR Psychometrics, and Zander van Lille.
Good day, colleagues. As Hanneli mentioned, I'll be co-hosting the session. I'm a registered industrial psychologist and really looking forward to this insightful webinar.
Thank you very much, Zander, and I appreciate you co-presenting with me. During this Lunch and Learn webinar, you will be introduced to the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. That is a very well-known international intervention tool that's used to measure conflict in teams and also in organizations. In short, we will refer to the TKI, and it's internationally, you will see that it is distributed by Consulting Psychologist Press or Myers-Briggs Company, as they are known now, and then with JVR Psychometrics, that is the local representative here in South Africa. The authors of the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument is very well known for their work in organizations and with team building in using the TKI, but it also goes beyond just conflict management. There are many more applications that we will talk about later in the webinar that you can use the TKI also for. Now that you had an introduction about who we are and what we are going to talk about, I would like to just quickly do a poll and see who we are having in our audience. Will you please quickly just tick the different options on the poll so that we can just see who we are listening to? You will see, you will also be able to tick more than one of the different options. So I'm just going to give it a few minutes just so that you can quickly just answer the poll for us. Okay, thank you very much. So we've got about 75% professional psychologists and 25% others, and also 25% of the human resources. So thank you very much. So then you are more than welcome to also during the interview just type some questions if you have any questions while we're busy progressing through the webinar. You are more than welcome to do that. And then just for the general housekeeping rules, I just want to remind you that as you're aware, this webinar is also for you to earn some CPD points according to the HPCSA rules. And at the end of the webinar, there will also be a quiz that you must complete for us, and also the evaluation form. That is very important so that you can receive your points as soon as you've completed those two questionnaires afterwards. When we go on to the next slide, I just want to check that quickly. Okay, and with this slide, I just want to quickly provide you with a structure and rhythm of how we will be guiding the discussion. Before we out the time, we are going to look at the broader context and background and that the tool will be used often. So we will look at the impact of conflict on organization, that is done to see what are happening in organizations and how we really face situations. Very briefly, I would like to take you through the brief of the TKI and then also conflict that is measured by the TKI. And then after that, we will do a short simulation exercise and also ask you to identify the different modes that we are demonstrating to you. And then after that, I would like in the next discussion just quickly look at the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument in terms of the administration, scoring, and a little bit of the interpretation, and then just shortly the research that has been conducted the Thomas-Kilmann works of the cultural differences or any differences when it comes to measuring conflict styles and conflict modes. So when we go on to the next slide, then we look at a very short definition of conflict. And when we look at the definition that Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kilman provide, they define conflict as any situation in which one person concerned or desires are different from those of another person. It is as simple as that. Conflict is of really heated arguments, just a simple opinion between two or more persons. So whether we are at home or at work, conflict is a natural part of it with each other. People differ from each other in their preferences, their perceptions of values, even when they have been brought up in the same place and in the same way. So it goes to say that people can't agree on everything all the time. Disagreements are inevitable, and somewhere we will run into situations where we disagree with one another. So it's a natural part of our interactions every day. And what I found and what we see most of the time, conflict is regarded as somewhat negative and it has to be avoided at all costs. So you will sometimes see when you have colleagues in the passage and they are suddenly disagreeing a certain topic, they find that there are other and suddenly very quickly disappear, and only the two people that are disagreeing with each other are in the passage. So people find it very uncomfortable, and they are faced with conflict and they don't actually know how to react towards the other person. So, but on the other hand, when conflict is actually well managed, conflict can be very constructive. So conflict can be a catalyst to move people with different opinions to find more effective problem-solving strategies, and it can force people to use more innovative to resolve opposing ideas. So although conflict can be productive, it can also very easily spiral into something that's very destructive and become very costly in terms of hours spent to resolve conflict and to keep both parties actually satisfied. So also looking when I was busy with looking at the definition of conflict, I was also actually why is conflict viewed in such a negative? I'm just going on to the next slide. And I was wondering why does that happen? Why would we in such a negative way? And it's something that's actually what we experience every day. And I just looked at a few points that I could think of really is something that we'll find that we view conflict in not such a positive. It's because it sometimes elicits very strong. And then also most of the time, we find that the strong emotions are very negative. People might also experience it as a personal attack on them, and they feel sometimes very threatened. And all of that negative emotion to be viewed in a negative way. And we also find that conflict initially, when they did research in conflict, it has been researched actually since the 1960s. And initially, conflict in organizations had a very negative on it and was seen as something that you have to avoid at all costs. So in the 1970s, there was a little bit of a shift in the research, and they were looking more at how to manage these recurring conflicts in organizations. And currently, the view on conflict more into focusing on conflict, but more in a positive way. So how would you take something that you are experiencing every day, and how can you actually flip it around and look more from a positive perspective at conflict? So instead of just focusing on the negative side of conflict, we started to look at what the value could be and what contributions you actually find from conflict situations, and how can you actually constructive conflict and actually move someone forward or move an organization forward. So what they have, if you resolve conflict way, then foster growth in the organization by challenging the state and promoting creativity and innovation. So it helps because it forces people to neglect. So things that they don't really want to talk about, they are actually forced during a situation to really address the specific situation. I would like to move on to this, and then we're going to look at impact conflict on organizations. So when we look at organizations within South Africa and also internationally, then we see that conflict is actually a global occurrence. So it's not just in Africa, and you might find that conflict can take emotional on employees in a company, but it can also affect a company in a financial way. So when you look at the impact of conflict on an organization, then there are three categories that where conflict can actually affect the organization. So directly, you might find that it can have an impact on the organization in terms of lowered productivity. You might see a little bit more absenteeism from the employees, lower turnover, and sometimes even a damage to the company's reputation. So then you will see in terms of financial implication that conflict can have in an organization, and also there are also hidden costs that can affect organization. And then what you may also find if you look at the second category, then to the employees themselves. So you may find that sometimes poor employee health and well-being can actually be associated. So conflict can affect the employee's commitment, their mind to do his or her work, and mental stress negatively affects the employee's ability to focus, to make proper decisions. So you will find that sometimes there might be even poor decision making because of a situation that an employee finds it difficult to actually deal with.
Manali, I find it curious. So obviously there could be very destructive consequences of, but I can also, as you mentioned earlier, could have potentially positive implications if successfully resolved and appropriately managed. For example, open discussions could have better ideas, could result in better ideas, and perhaps be a source of trust between members of an organization.
Yeah. I believe if people are emotionally mature, then you should be able to, resolve your conflict in a way that it is conducive actually to the employees and organization. And we would like to actually see that conflict as some catalyst. It moves you actually forward. You are able to actually resolve it in a more constructive way because it allows you to start to think about a situation. So especially also in the world that we are currently in, and you want to move organizations forward, you sometimes very critically analyze the situation and start asking questions and see where do you have differences in the views and how you can actually move because new ideas are born. Sometimes you might not expect an employee to answer for you, and you might be actually really surprised if you focus on really conflict in a very constructive way. You don't want to have destructive conflict because that actually then really causes the company and the employees that are actually building the company or should be building the company. So you might also find things the company and the employees that work within the organization that is affected. It's also there's a cost to the client or customer. So if you find that your employees are constantly in disagreement, you can't decide okay, who is going to order out or who is going to be responsible for the service that the customer is receiving at the end of the day. So it's very important that a person manages a conflict in a very good way, and also trying to rather focus more on the side of conflict resolution. Then when we look at another cause of sometimes actually create more opportunities, then we look at the changing organizational structure. So we find now that companies are actually trying to centralize some functions, the infrastructure, and they're trying to cut costs and see how can they actually centralize the financial system of a company, the IT. And then you find that a lot of different departments might be thrown together in one building, and you might also find one building and people have to share the resources, and actually creates also opportunities for employees to actually start with infighting within an organization. It's very important that when you actually try to centralize function, you must also see how would it impact on the employees themselves. Is it worth it? Because it might have an impact on the operations, even then eventually on the financial part or the profit of the organization. But that can also create a specific situation where you might find that the organizational structure is not conducive to, to minimize actually situations where conflict might arise among employees. With the next slide, I would just like to also then look at the incidents or occurrences in organizations. So in 2008, the consulting psychologist press or company, well, they would like to do a global and they partnered with OPP and Felipe in Brazil, and they decided to do a research study on conflict. What is the nature of workplace conflict? And so they studied workers in 9 different countries and collected data for their research study to see what are the costs of conflict within workplace. So they found that in the study that an overwhelming majority of about 85% employees deals with conflict more or less every day. So many of them reported that at all levels are some degree of conflict. And they also found that if you look specifically at the US employees, they spend about, on average, 2.8 hours a week dealing with, and that then equates to approximately $359 billion in paid hours in 2008. And 36% of employees also said conflict quite always and frequently. So it's not something that's just here and there. It forms a part of your daily functions or operations within an organization. And then you find that managers 20 to 40% of their time in managing conflict situations. So they are actually using that time to sort out problems rather than focusing on other aspects that might be more important. Even in the research study, they found that a majority of the HR workers, around half of them, spend 1 to 5 hours a week just to resolve conflict. So it's something that is part of an organization, a daily routine. But despite all the statistical data and evidence, the study also found that formal conflict management has a positive effect on how conflict within organization. And they said they reported that 95% of people receiving training as part of development program or on any formal external course said that it helped them in some way. So given all the research that has been done on conflict, I think it is to just see what is the context that we are dealing with when we look at specifically using an instrument to see how and is it really important, or is it just something that's nice to have? But I think if we look at the situation within organizations and we look at conflict, then it occurs and what's the incidence of it, then I think it's really important to look at how can you manage situations so that it's constructive and that employees actually then have a positive experience of the organization. I just quickly want to go to just a short brief history in terms of where does the TKI come, and I've seen it in cases in organizations, but I never knew myself, for instance, where did this instrument originated from. And I just quickly want to go through the brief history because the TKI itself is about 40 years old in terms of where did it start and is today. So when we look at the TKI, the 5 conflict handling modes actually originates from the Blake and Mouton model in 1964. So what they did is they also they identified the conflict handling modes, and they where they measured these conflict handling modes. So they had 5 statements, and each mode, and a person could then respond and just simply pick one of the statements that describe usually their behavior. And then they also had to rank it. But according to these statements, the statements were compiled or designed in such a way, the items, that it actually were phrased in such a way that respondents specifically answered in a very socially desirable way. So you would have found that sometimes your managers would all say that they use a collaborative style and that they don't avoiding style at all. And then when you go to the subordinates and you ask them, then they say that's not the same person. And so from there, Kenneth Thomas and Thomas-Kilmann decided they would like to take the Blake and Mouton instrument. I believe that they would like to design items and an instrument measuring these 5 conflict handling modes, but they would they wanted to actually minimize the effect of answering in a socially desirable way. But at the stage that they were busy thinking about it in the 1970s, they were doing their PhD, and Thomas was busy also helping another professor at the university bring a conflict course together that was sponsored by Zycom. And he went to Zycom and he asked them whether they would be interested in publishing his instrument, because otherwise the TKI as an instrument would have just been an appendix to a journal article, and then we never would have had the opportunity to really have such a nice non-threatening type of instrument to use as an intervention tool. So in 1974, Zycom published the TKI, and then in 1998, CPP actually acquired Zycom, and they became the publisher of the TKI. At that stage, when Zycom still were publishing the TKI, then the norm group consisted of about 339 managers on middle management level, and on the upper level, Kilmann and Thomas also felt that the quite full, and they would have liked to see that the sample grows so that they could see whether the TKI measured conflict the same across countries and across different cultures. So then in 2002, CPP then managed to put the TKI online, and that allowed them actually to gain access to a lot more respondents. And then they had actually about 59,000 people completing the TKI. And from there, they then had a randomized sample of 4,000 females and 4,000 male people that completed the TKI, and that provided them with an opportunity to update the TKI's norms from the 1970s to the 2000s. So then it also was published in 2007, the technical brief. There wasn't a manual or anything on the TKI, and then CPP published in 2007 the technical brief with the compilation of all the different forms. And then in 2008, as mentioned previously, then CPP did their research in the 9 different countries, where they then did research to see if the US population really differs in conflict situations or conflict handling. Do they differ from the rest of the world? And in 2011, in the international TKI technical brief, they then did their data, and they compiled newer norms, and they found that, as a practical matter, that the US TKI norms do not really diverge very strongly from those of the countries in this specific study. And then as they progress further, then in 2013 and 2014, further research studies has been undertaken by CPP or the Myers-Briggs company with other translated versions such as Japanese. And even from these studies, they found that there aren't a very significant difference between the norms created in the US, and they were quite happy with the norm compilation and the cross-cultural differences and language differences. So when we look at the instrument itself, there has been quite a lot of work in terms of research done to see how well do the norm groups compare within the differences and globally. So when we look at the application of the TKI, then we can see it can be used for many different settings and also for different purposes. So the main purpose that it was initially developed for was to see how the TKI can be used to measure conflict management and to see how you actually help people to develop more skills so that they will be able to manage conflict situations a little bit better. And we find that it's by source employees and by organizational development as a catalyst to also open up discussions on difficult issues and also to facilitate learning in how to deal with the different conflict situations, and that it will also affect how you will, on a personal level, relate to other people within an organization. And then you will also find that it's quite a nice tool to use team building. People find it non-threatening, and they actually like to talk about it because there's no right and a wrong in terms of the conflict handling modes that you specifically use. So in team building, it can also help sorting out barriers in team members and also for better understanding and awareness. It's also often, and especially Kilmann and Thomas, if you go onto the internet and you look at the different videos and online training that you can attend, they specifically have leadership development training in terms of how to utilize the tool to help leaders become aware of their conflict style and how does that impact an organization and on employees that they are actually managing. It's also used for performance improvement, so trying to actually take away the barriers that can hinder a person to perform and be engaged and really be productive. And it also helps to reduce stress, because if you can show an employee, teach them and show them how to use the different conflict handling modes and actually improve on certain skills and develop it, then it will relieve a little bit of stress, because that conflict can cause quite a lot of stress in an organization. And if you have happy employees, and it can also then immediately relate to retention. So you may have employees that are happy, the morale is high, and they will stay engaged, and even they not necessarily leave the organization to find a better situation or a better organization where there's no conflict, because that will never happen. There's always conflict, but how do you as an individual then actually relate to conflict? And if you feel that you are able to manage conflict, then you find that then the situation becomes a little bit better. Okay. And in the next going to do, we are going to then look at the different conflict handling modes. But before I get to those specific slides, then I would like to just go and look at the two axes on which, or basic concepts of dimensions that the TKI measures. So when you look at the Thomas-Kilmann, you will find that it is designed to measure a person's behavior in conflict situations, and then in conflict situation we can describe then a person's behavior along two dimensions. The one dimension is assertiveness. That is the extent or degree the person attempts to satisfy his or her own concerns. Sometimes people would see it also as task-oriented, but in terms of conflict situations, we will just keep to a person can measure high or low on the dimension, and then on the other axis that it crosses, it's called cooperativeness.
Annelie,
yes.
I found it so interesting. I hadn't seen that it's just a conceptual link that I thought about, but when I read through the TKI, or information, the TKI,
yes.
I found a sort of a conceptual link between those two axes represent and what you find in typical axes to differentiate different interpersonal characteristics, especially on the interpersonal circumplex. Yes. And they also have axes such as dominance, which in this case might be similar to assertiveness, and affiliation might be cooperativeness, and they also derive particular characteristics from those two main axes. And I thought, how well suited is it, because conflict is an interpersonal domain, unless you do it with yourself.
No, I fully agree with that. When we look at conflict, then we sometimes look at people within their ability to present themselves on an interpersonal level, and you would look at how well can they actually put forward their ideas. So that would be on the axis of assertiveness, and then cooperativeness is more than on an axis and the extent or the degree to which a person attempts to satisfy other people's concerns. So if I have to give it another name, then it would be more or less something like relationship. So how important is that for you on a continuum from low to high? And a person can fall onto anywhere on those two basic dimensions. And then eventually from there, based on those basic dimensions, you can actually then identify the 5 different conflict handling modes that is measured by the TKI. But when we look at conflict and a conflict mode that you are using at a given time, it also depends on your level of skill. How well can you present yourself in a specific, let's say, conflict handling mode, and then also the context or situation is also very important. So where would you use, for instance, a specific way of discussing differences or opinions in a situation? So according then to the developers of the TKI, we are capable of using conflict handling modes. It will then just depend on our skill. And these as can be characterized by just using one skill. We might find that we have a very high score on there are some of the conflict handling modes. You will also see there's a score on the TKI, and everybody's profile can actually differ from each. But unlike other where we say this is good, the TKI doesn't distinguish between that. It's more using a mode appropriately for a specific situation. We may find that sometimes we would overuse or specific mode because we feel we are more comfortable with it, but we can actually create more complicated situations, even more difficult to handle if we use the right type of negotiation style or conflict handling for a specific situation. So what we want to do with the TKI is also to create an awareness of which styles do you use most often, and then which styles you should actually try and develop skills in using them more effectively. So you might also find that certain people might also prefer to use certain modes. You will that they will fall back on those, but those would be the most that they are very comfortable with, and it will also depend on your temperament and personality and who you are as a person, and how well you can present yourself in a conflict situation. And then it's also sometimes important to look at the organization and the context in which the conflict situation takes place, or differences in opinion, because that will also actually be the deciding factor in terms of what you will be using and would be most comfortable with. In the next slide, then you will see with the 5 handling modes. So you would see if a person, for instance, lies very high on assertiveness, then you will find that they might choose to use the competing style or the collaborating style, but then on whether they are high on relationship building or whether they are very low on cooperativeness. So when you look at the TKI, it will provide you then with an indication of which mode a person would prefer. So all of these conflict handling modes are modes that we actually should learn to use. It's just to find a way to see which one would be the most appropriate. And sometimes we are more skillful in using a specific mode. Just going on to the next slide, I'm going to start just talking about and discussing all the different conflict handling modes, so individually talking about them, and also what type of skills you would need for them or be effective in, and then also what happens when you overuse or underuse them. Okay. Then when we look at the first one, I think it says everything. If you talk about the style, the slogan for it is "My way or the highway." And then you will also see what it means is that a person, if a person scores a very high on assertiveness and very low on cooperativeness, then they would use most often competing style. And their goal is, so there's no real negotiation really happening, and they just want to actually win. And then when I like to sometimes use the conflict handling modes and compare them with the characteristics of animals, and you will see there's a little shark in the bottom corner of the slide, and that says it all. So if you look at the characteristics of a shark, then you will see that they try to overpower their opponent by forcing them to actually accept the solution. So there's not really a lot of negotiation, but the person forces other people to really accept their position. And then what you will find is that relationships are not a concern for them, really at the bottom of their list. And you may also find that they always say, but somebody must win and somebody must lose. So they're quite happy, but they want to be the ones that win. So they like to take, it's usually really well if you use the competing conflict handling style, where action must take place. So when the building is burning, you can't say, oh, I want to really first think about it. You actually have to very quickly act about it. So in situations or situations where there's no time really to talk about it and where you have to take quick action, then this type of conflict handling mode would be most appropriate. And also where you actually have to make very unpopular decisions. So where certain cost-cutting strategies must take place, then you sometimes, as a manager, have to take those unpopular decisions and say to your employees, listen, we have to be careful. Please make sure that you don't waste a lot of money. And then also where you have to stand up for vital issues. It's something that really you feel, I can't negotiate about this, I can't not talk about it. It's an important issue and I have to stand up for a specific opinion or a specific strategy, then you will find that this style would be appropriate. And also where you have to put yourself, then you might find that you have to be very forceful and a person actually has to use this mode to be able to stand their ground. So it can be for other people a very intimidating type of position that the person sometimes takes, but it's sometimes very important in critical situations to use the competing conflict handling mode. But in order to use this style, you have to have specific skills to use this mode effectively. So you may find that you have to be able to organize your thoughts very quickly and that you have a very strong case for your position. So you might find that you might be arguing or debating, and sometimes you also have to use a rank or position or influence to be comfortable. You have to be very comfortable. So you mustn't feel or somebody is intimidating you, or you have to be very strong. You must be able to sit down, and you must also communicate your position very clearly in order to actually win the situation. And that those would be the skills that would be most appropriate for the style. And then what we will look at is also then the overuse and underuse of the competing style. And we can think ourselves what would happen if somebody just comes in and they just want to get their opinion approved by everybody, but there's no talking about it and let's just do it. Then we find that there is a lack of feedback. Nobody wants to actually really oppose the person. Then you find that if you overuse it, then people will not necessarily share their opinions with the other person. And then you might also find that sometimes you have a reduced learning, and also you might only be surrounded by yes people. So everybody is the whole time.
Yes, Anneli.
Yeah. And then when you look at the underuse of competing, then you might also find that you've got a restricted influence, so people don't take you seriously. You might find that people will think, okay, but you are indecisive, you deny action, you don't make sense, and that you are actually withholding contributions that you could have made to the organization. So this would be the conflict handling situation. And then the second one that people often use is collaborating. I'm not going to go in such detail with all the styles, but when we look at collaborating, then you will see it's compared to an L. So what you find there, you may find that for an L, it's important to meet both goals of both parties. But on the other hand, they also want to actually promote the relationship, so they don't want people to have a bad relationship. So they try to situation. And in this situation, you might sometimes have to actually have a lot to dig the root cause of the problem, and then also afterwards you have to make sure that everybody is happy. And then also with this type of style, you may find that you have a specific skills that you need elaborating. So you have to have the ability to listen, understand and empathize, but you also have to be non-threatening so that you can actually elicit the other person's opinion. But you need to also identify underlying concerns. So, but the biggest thing with collaborating is you try to have a situation where you both get the same deal and you're both happy. When competing and collaborating doesn't work, then you may find, I'm just going to skip the overuse and underuse of these styles, but then you will also find that the next style that you might move over to when these two styles don't work is the compromising style. So that's the style where a person has a moderate concern for to meet their goal and a moderate concern for relationships. So they believe, okay, let's make a deal. They believe, okay, I will give something away of where I want to be, but then I also want you to do that. So you will find this is more of compromising. You lose a little bit and you win a little bit. And a lot of times people use this type of conflict handling style if the time is a little bit more limited, or if there's a deadlock and competing or collaborating is not working. And where you also sometimes find that if I am willing to compromise and I provide that opportunity to another colleague of mine, then I might find that they will do it. And also to give, to the or give. And then the other two styles that I also quickly want to look at is the avoiding conflict style. And yeah, with compromising, negotiating is very important to find the middle ground. And then I'm just quickly running to the avoiding style. So we would think, okay, the avoiding style might be a style that people will say, but this person doesn't really want to engage in conflict. They're very low on assertiveness, very low on cooperativeness. So they might see it as a weak, that you are weak, you don't really want to negotiate and to run away like the animal that I've got there, that's the turtle, so they don't like to really situations that make them comfortable. But the avoiding style can work very well when you have to buy some time and where you know this is not to specifically bring an issue forward. And then when we go to the last style, the conflict handling style that we have left out would be that style that is accommodating style. So a person, and it's also then compared to the teddy bear. So assertiveness is very low. So to reach your goal is not so important, but to maintain the relationship is really very important when using this type of style. So trying to keep the peace, trying to create a goodwill, and then maintaining perspective, but the relationship for the people are really important. And they are also not, it's not necessarily a weak type of a conflict handling style. It is something where you may find people will do it out of respect, or people would feel, okay, but if I do this, then, or act in a way, then I'm actually going to, destroy the relationship or damage the relationship. So these are the 5 conflict handling. And before anything else, we would like a simulation to do the different conflict handling styles that we have. And then I want you to, with a poll, decide which of these styles that we use during the role play. So we're just going to move over to doing quickly the role play. Good morning, Janneman. I see they find some time to come and meet with me.
Good day, Frikkie. Yes, I saw your email and I just want to address it to you in person. Frikkie, you know, from a long time, I've always had a lot of respect for your judgment and your sense of fairness.
Mm.
And there's just a few concerns that I have with the email that you sent to discuss with you, more particularly around flexi time in the company.
Yeah, you know what? I send an email to employees, tell them from Monday, the 19th of November, I want them all to 5. I don't care. I don't want any flexi time working hours. I just want them to be here. Please send the email out and just tell them they have to be here. From 5 with 1 hour lunch break, and that is it. Please do that for me.
Frikkie, I know there was concerns about flexi time in the past. More specifically, we know that some employees are abusing it, that they eating time and only leaving at 3. And I understand what your point of view, but I wondered, before we take more drastic measures, perhaps from a procedural fairness point of view, approach employees first, or these disciplinary procedures that go against offenders and not against those individuals who are keeping with the rules, in order to make a fair decision.
You know what? I was yesterday so livid and so upset. Because on 3 o'clock to find the sales department, I couldn't find them. And then unfortunately, I hold of an employee in one of the other departments and I asked them, where are they? And she said, no, but they have gone home. And I said, but how do you go home at 3 o'clock and you're supposed to be here until 5? And then she says, no, that's been carrying on for months. So she says the sales department specifically then comes in at 9 and leave at 3. And we have spoken, I know we've spoken to our managers and we've asked them that they really should look at when are the employees coming to work, are they not coming, and that they must actually control it. And I just decided from yesterday, this flexi time is not going to work. I can't even get sales figures from myself. I want them on Monday. Yeah.
Frikkie, I do understand your concern and the urgency of the matter. I just wonder if you can't perhaps give people a month's notice, maybe, just so that they can put their personal arrangements in place. Some have family responsibilities, they have to pick up their children at school in the afternoon. Won't it be possible to at least give people a month's time to put necessary preparations in place to accommodate people?
I might give them 2 weeks. That's the only time that I can really negotiate about. I was really very angry, and I believe that's what you do at work, is you come and be productive, because that's why our profit and our sales were plummeting. But yesterday I had an eye open and I actually see, well, there's nobody, that's why it happens. And if I can, I would like them really to be here this Monday.
Frikkie, I think maybe 2 weeks would be suitable. I'll confirm what we discussed over email, and thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. You will see that we've put a poll, and we would like all the attendees to just see if they can identify the different conflict handling styles that we during the role play. And you may find that we might have used more than one different style. So you will see on the poll, I see that 100% said collaborating, and 100% said compromising, and 100% said avoiding. I don't see anything on competing. I tried to be competitive or to use the competing style, but yeah, you will also sometimes find when you look at the different conflict handling styles, specifically collaborating and compromising, it's sometimes difficult in conversations to see what are people actually using. But with compromise, for me, it's giving with collaborating. You're trying to satisfy both parties without actually losing something. But I think those are the two styles that's sometimes more difficult to distinguish.
Just come to show that often conflict management styles are not set either or, but it's very dynamic.
Yeah.
And sometimes different styles might be elicited even in the same conversation.
You might find that a person will start off with a specific style, and then if that is not working, then they will go over another type of style and see whether they will know better results from there. Okay, thank you very much for participating in our poll on the different styles. With the next slide, I would just then like to move over to the TKI itself. You will see I'm just quickly going through the different conflict handling styles. So in summary, if you look at the 5 animals with the different styles, and you will see again just in short that you will have your win-lose situation with a competing style, collaborating would be more win-win, and your avoiding style would be either lose for both parties, or you might have the turtle will lose and the other party will win. And then with your accommodating style, you will have then the person would be prepared to lose and rather have the other party then win in the conflict situation, with compromising, trying to then actually have a 50-50% in terms of reaching the goal, and then also trying to keep the relationship at such a level people do still experience them as positive. So this is in short a summary, and then when we look at the Thomas-Kilmann itself, then I just shortly want to give you just a short summary on it. And you will see that Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kilman are the authors, like I mentioned before. And the Thomas-Kilmann consists of 30 items, so it's 4 items, and they were designed and developed in such a way that they could diminish or just make the social desire responses a little bit less. It actually forces a person to answer so that you could identify the different styles in terms of conflict handling. And then with the Thomas itself, you have 2 options. You have a hand scoring or an online scoring version available. And when we look at the example on the TKI itself that is on the slide, and that would be the workbook, the hand scoring one that people sometimes like to use, especially in team building. If you also have your participants sometimes score their own conflict handling style or their own little workbook, then you find that it consists of the questionnaire itself, where they can answer in the workbook itself, and then you can just show them as the facilitator how to quickly count up their scores to see on the one page where on all 5 different conflict handling styles, and then they can also just quickly see where their scores are in terms of on the graph, then also in relation to then the international sample of the 4,000 randomized people. So your scores would be from 0 to 12 on each of these conflict handling, and then it's also expressed in a percentile. So if a person has a very high score on the TKI, then it means that they are, let's say, if you look at a person has, say, 80% on competing, then it means that they actually scored higher than 80% of the norm sample. And that means actually that they are in the top 20% of people on, for instance, the competing handling style. But you will also see when you score the TKI, there are 2 thicker lines, and they actually divide the middle average score. So you will have then the top 25% will be above the line, and then the low bottom would be the 25%, and it will be a very low score then on the specific conflict styles. And then in the middle you have 50%, so it would be an average score on any one of those scales on the TKI. But when we interpret it, we always say that there are no right or wrong answers to these conflict handling styles. And it will depend on the situation, also on your level of skill in these different styles, of which one you would also be more comfortable. And the TKI itself is not a selection tool. So it's used as an intervention tool, and it has more of a purpose. Then when we also TKI is quickly pasted just a sample of the report in itself, but the whole report of the TKI that's fine. You can actually also get of the different 5 conflict handling styles. You get your out of 12, and then also in terms of the percentile score, you also get 25%, your 5%, and then in the middle, the 50% scores. So you get that type of information in your online review, and you can, and then also a little bit of interpretation, and it describes in how do you, in which situation a specific style would be more appropriate or most appropriate, and then also in terms of how does it look if you underuse or so you get basically in both versions of the TKI, you will get all the information, and sometimes you might find it's personal which one you would like to use. Sometimes people might want to use the TKI online, then you have sometimes your before, if you prefer that, to have that before that you facilitate, then the TKI can work very well, and you can do it online and you get the results. So those would be the 2 different options that you can get in terms of the version of the TKI that you use to determine the conflict handling styles. Just very quickly, I would like to just give a summary of research. So in terms of for us as psychologists and psychometrists, research is very important in terms of the psychometric qualities of an instrument, and it's very important for us to see that it has a research globally, and that it's an instrument that you can use globally, and that there isn't really a big difference between cultures, different language groups, and also between the Japanese translation and other translations. They found that the statistical difference is that really not really necessary to create specifically a norm group according to language preferences. So, and this ends our Lunch and Learn webinar today. You will also see that the last slide have all the different resources we used. There's also a very nice conflict facilitators guide if ever you want to use the Thomas-Kilmann in a situation where you are facilitating conflict resolution, then that one is really very useful. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a very nice afternoon further.